you for joining us today. We have the great pleasure today to have Dana Nichols with us. Now that name may sound familiar to many of you because for many, many years, Dana was the reporter for the Stockton Record for how many years? For like 10, 12 years, or it was.
Well, I was a record reporter for 26
Yeah.
years, but only about 10 or 12 of that was up here.
Okay, yeah. And since back in our youth, we used to sit basically on the front row at the board meetings for several years, right? But our subject for today is Dana is doing great work now. He's on the board of the San Andreas Fire Department, correct?
Correct.
And we're going to talk a little bit about the fire business, so to speak, in the area. And it is, it's an uneven patchwork in some ways, isn't it? Is it a little bit?
Every district is really
Okay.
different, John.
Yeah.
And I didn't really understand a lot of that. I just knew that, like the rest of us, that when emergency calls went out, that somebody responded.
Right.
But I didn't understand the system. And the way that I learned about this was I volunteered to drive what's called the breathing support for San Andreas Fire. San Andreas has the only mobile breathing support. And what that is it's a big truck that has a compressor on it. When there's a structure fire and the firefighters have to use their air bottles, they get emptied, and in order for them to be ready to go to the next incident, we prefer that we fill the bottles on scene,
Right.
so that they can have a ready. So
They
that
go
they're
back in the
set.
truck, so
Well,
to
they go
speak,
back
yeah.
in the truck, and they're ready if another
Yeah.
call breaks, because it's random when
Yeah.
the calls break, and they might get another one. So I started doing this, and because it's the only one in the county, I've gone all over the place. I've been in snowstorms in Murphy's doing it. I've gone up to the Forest Meadows area. I've gone to Copperopolis, Valley Springs, Calaveras Consolidated, Moke Hill, West Point, places all over.
For a small spot, that's a very fascinating but also instructive spot, right? I mean,
It is because
yeah.
I get to see who's there, and one of the big takeaways is that whenever we have a major incident, and I'm talking about a structure
Yeah.
fire,
Yeah.
you have people there from at least 3 agencies, 4 agencies. And the mix varies quite a bit because a lot of times of the year we have CAL FIRE
Right.
here, so they help when they're available.
Mhm.
But there are times when either their staffing is reduced because it's the off-season, or they're all allocated to major fires elsewhere in California.
So they got a skeleton crew.
So they've got to skeleton.
Yeah.
Well, it's even more than that. It's that CAL FIRE may sometimes hire local engines from the local agencies to backfill and
Right.
serve as CAL FIRE
Right.
engines.
Right.
So literally, the resources we have in these local fire districts are the backup plan when the state is busy elsewhere, right? But nobody really knew. I didn't know about that before I started doing all this.
So, in essence, that's sometimes as people are listening to the scanner or something like that, they'll hear a move up and cover or whatever. Is that basically if the resources are committed? I mean,
Yes,
to make
yes,
sure
yes.
that you
There's
have,
always a lot of movement of resources, and
Right.
and even though just to explain it, we have 9 fire districts and 1 municipal fire department in Calaveras County. So that's 10 local agencies, and then we also have CAL FIRE, which is a state agency, and then BLM/Forest Service. There's also some federal firefighters.
Right.
So there's a lot of different
Right.
people who get some piece of the firefighting here, but the backbone of it for day-to-day purposes is the local fire agencies, and that's because we do everything.
Right.
The federal and state resources are primarily intended for wildland fires.
Right.
Whereas we have the extraction tools to cut you out of a car, we have the specialized engines. People don't know about the different kinds of engines. An engine for a structure fire, a type 2 or a type 1, it can pump 3 times as fast and often has a larger tank. The wildland rigs have smaller tanks because they have
Yeah,
to go
to be
on
mobile.
rougher terrain.
Right.
They have to be
Right.
mobile, and so they're just designed for a different purpose. So it really matters what resources are available, and the local fire agencies have the right resources for all purposes. And just another thing to say is, okay, structure fires is kind of what we are
Yeah.
named for, but 2/3 of our calls are medical calls.
Right, right,
And a lot
right,
of our calls
right.
are for things like eliminating a rattlesnake in the garage,
Yes.
or just a lift assist. I
Yeah,
mean,
the lift assist calls,
people,
yes.
You know, we age, or we have a health problem and we can't get up, and it makes it viable. Really, to have a fire agency able to do that often makes it viable for people to stay in their home who might otherwise be forced into a
Right.
living situation that they wouldn't want
So
to be
there's a
in.
community benefit for things like the low level calls,
Right,
in
it's a
essence, a
huge
low level call.
community benefit in taking care of our fire agencies so that they can continue to respond. I could kind of freewheel a little bit here about it, but I know the most about San Andreas because that's the agency that I've
Right.
been, 3 years now I've been on the board, and for about 5 I've been doing the breathing support. And we have, for a few years now, always had a policy of always having at least 2 firefighters there. These are volunteers. If they're willing to do a 24-hour shift, we've been giving them $75, but we've increased that recently. We've been giving them money to spend the 24-hour shift there, so that we have somebody who's available to
Right.
respond.
Right.
2 is really not adequate, and what happened is in the recent years with the bad wildfire seasons, we upped it to 3 when we could afford it. But the
Because
iron,
to run, you need the 3 on a truck ideally, right?
well,
Don't you need a,
there's certain circumstances with wildland fires, if you go to a state, what's called a state incident that the CAL FIRE is running,
yeah,
and they will eventually pay once you're there for a certain number of hours, but only if you're staffed with at least 3.
Right.
And that's because that's considered the minimum level to be able to operate safely. You know, you might do what they call mobiling, have you ever heard of that?
Mhm.
Where the one firefighter is walking with the hose, actually maybe 2 of them are
Yep.
outside, and one of them is driving the rig.
Right.
Well, you need 3 people to be able to watch everything and try to do that safely and not hang the truck up or run into a hot spot that you shouldn't be in.
right,
You know,
Right.
so say they like to have at least 3 people on those. So we started doing that. There's other reasons that 3 is better than 2. And that has to do with all of the medical calls. So if you get in a situation where you're actually doing a CPR,
right.
have you ever done a CPR?
I have not.
Have you taken the training?
It's been a lot of years.
Well, then you know,
Yes.
if you do the training, it's pretty exhausting. If you try to do those cycles of 3
Yes.
minutes at a time,
Yes.
it doesn't take long to be exhausted,
yeah.
and then the quality of the CPR will go down. You need to maintain that
So you
quality.
need to be able to cycle through.
So we rotate. They train the firefighters to be able to rotate through
Right.
and do that. And so that's why it's important to have more if possible. So National Fire Protection Association recommends 4 firefighters on an engine, that should be the standard. Nobody's doing that consistently here.
Right.
Sometimes we are able to achieve that because we have trainees. So sometimes we'll have 3 that we're paying stipends to, and then we'll have a trainee, or we'll have somebody who's kind enough to spend some time hanging out in the station, and we'll get to 4. So I'm incredibly lucky when disasters happen in my neighborhood. It was May of 2020, a house 2 doors up from mine on Broadway Street here in San Andreas, an old wooden house, caught fire, and it just went up like a torch.
Yeah.
Fortunately, it was a Tuesday night. Tuesday night is training night at San Andreas Fire District. So that means, boom, we had 2 fully staffed engines there immediately.
Right.
And that was a good thing because we actually needed to have what they call protection happening.
Yeah.
Because the radiant heat from that house was already melting blinds inside the windows of my neighbor's house.
So you had to wet everything
they
else.
they had some people with hoses outside doing that protection to keep it from spreading. But we also knew from our past medical calls that there was a possibility that there was somebody in there. We didn't know definitively. It turned out the house was empty.
Right.
But they had to send somebody in to
Right.
search.
You still got to search.
So
Yeah.
they went in with another hose and air tanks. So, but we had enough people to do that immediately. That's the level of service you want, is to be able to, I guess I should talk about 2 in, 2 out. You know about 2 in, 2 out?
No.
Okay. If you have a working structure fire, and it's usually necessary to go inside if you're going to reduce damage, if you can, you need to go in, but you can't go in safely. You can't have like 2 people go in unless there's 2 people out.
Got it.
And that is,
Got it.
when I say 2 people, I mean
Got it.
fully suited.
Right,
They've got all
right,
the protective
right,
gear
right.
on in case there's
In
an
case.
emergency and they have to go drag out
Right.
the people who are inside and get injured.
Right.
There was this terrible.
Like if a rafter comes down or a piece
Well,
of
and
ceiling tile.
there was
or-
this terrible incident in central Stockton several decades ago that I remember well, where a firefighter, his last name was Golden, got killed. And what it was somebody had installed a dance studio in the second floor of their home, but they didn't permit it. So the city didn't know that there was all that weight on the upper floor. Well, a fire happened, they've got the data on the house, and it looked like it was safe to send firefighters in, but it wasn't, because the increased weight meant that the failure came more quickly. And so they had a death. So anyway, there's all these protocols. I'm well aware of how dangerous that is. And there's been times where I've seen people from my own agency, a battalion chief, have to say, no, we're not going in, because he was looking at the damage already in the attic of a structure that was burning, and the fact that there were tiles. It was a tile roof, which was a heavier roof, and it's like it wasn't safe to go.
Yep.
So it becomes unfortunate, but there's this priority. You only risk life to save life. You don't risk life to save property. Right. You have to, that's the value, is protecting the life, and including the lives of the firefighters.
Yes.
Anyway, I could talk about that all day, but what do you want to get back to?
Well, no, I guess if for people who, because there's been a lot of population turnover with the COVID stuff. We have a lot of new population. I think an overview of, if people are coming from, say, a Bay Area, an urban area, and you come out here to rural areas, local rural fire districts are in bad shape. I mean, structurally, we've got to look at some ways to help them.
Right. Well, and this is okay. So in our agency, I was talking about, we always try to have 3 on, and sometimes it's only 2 if that's what we have available.
Right.
And things happen that personal needs, or the COVID pandemic, we had people get sick, and then they were out of action for a while. Sometimes we were more limited because we have been dependent on strike team money, so we will always make sure we can crew at least 2 on the home engine. But sometimes that's it if we send others out on a strike team.
Right.
We had to go on the strike teams because we needed the money to cover our expenses. And our district isn't the only one that's like that. So we don't send away our last firefighters. We keep some at home, but sometimes we're stretched thin. And it's really hard on somebody if, instead of just doing 2 days on and 4 days off, suddenly it's 4 days on or 8 days on. We've been asking these young people to do shifts that seem endless in the summertime.
Right.
And they pay a price for it.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
It's stressful.
Yeah.
And it's on top of the fact that it's a stressful job anyway. You're going to see people who are injured, people who are upset, people who are killed regularly. Okay? And I just, part of what I'm wanting to get to is to have enough staffing and to have enough resources that we can keep our staffing here and take better care of our firefighters. I want to be able to have reasonable shifts where, if occasionally you pull 4 days or something like that, then we give you a break so that you can recover from it. People need to have lives. That's why we mostly lose people, is they want to have a life. They want to get a job, be able to have a family, do some things beyond just pulling endless shifts. And it's not that they don't love being a firefighter, they do, because it's very rewarding, because you see every day how you've helped somebody.
Yes.
But they need to have shifts. So I know the most about San Andreas, but I know that other agencies struggle at times.
I know this is a little bit but on the staffing, I was talking to a Cal Fire Battalion chief a year or so ago, before this last fire season. He was saying the rest time is important, because you think about this, is our fire seasons tend to go on forever now, but the time that these guys got to October and November, which is really the most deadly portion, if you look at historically, September, October, November, that's crunch time.
It's the deadly.
But we wear these guys out before we get there.
We do.
So if we have these, you don't want to say, no fire is run of the mill, but if you have a bunch of grass fires and brush fires and everything else, while the fuel moistures are still, we wear people out, we wear equipment out, all the rest, before we get to crunch time. Am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong. That's exactly it. And that's, I always breathe a sigh of relief when we get a month or so into some rain, because it's like, oh, thank goodness people can start recovering.
Like the ones 2 or 3 weeks ago that we got that just drenched, drenched us. Yeah.
That was, but even though that happened, people shouldn't get complacent, because the bigger diameter vegetation rehydrate that fast. It
Right.
takes a while.
Right.
So the bigger diameter vegetation is still unfortunately very prone to burn even now.
Right.
And we've had some debris escapes even, people start burning their brush and they get careless and,
Well,
you know.
I mean, I guess the thing goes back to like the campfire, and the tragedy in
Right.
Paradise is people forget that it was the first drenching rain that helped put that thing out at the end. I mean, if we would have, if our first heavy rain would have been 3 days sooner,
yeah,
that wouldn't have happened.
yeah.
Anyway.
So it's a long season. Every agency in Calaveras County is a little bit different
Yeah.
in terms of their ability to recruit within their district, their resources to staff. But one of the members, well, I'll get to that later, but there are times when response times are heartbreakingly long. For example, I knew a story of a person who had a family member critically injured from a gunshot wound,
Mm-hmm.
who had to wait 45 minutes for medics to get there.
Mm.
And that, it's not really anybody's fault, but it is our responsibility to try to address it, because these districts are doing the best they can, but some of the ones that have, like Central Calaveras is the one that's tried a couple times to get assessments in the recent years, and
Yeah.
it's failed. By small margins, it's failed. Because there wasn't, I guess, enough of a consensus among the voters on what to do to address it.
Well, I think in a weird, it's in some of these areas is, a lot. They may not have had, may not have felt they had the extra money to do it. I mean, there may be a
Right.
fiscal motivation, maybe misplaced, but I
it
think
is. No, people feel squeezed. I have
Yeah.
no doubt about that. And there's a lot of people who have had nice lives out in the rural areas that find it increasingly expensive to maintain for a
Yes.
variety of reasons.
Mhm.
And so the idea of adding an assessment is difficult for them. Right.
Well, I guess the is like, for example, Ebbets, right?
Mm-hmm.
Ebbets is for locally, right? Isn't that probably the best funded local district?
It
in
is,
some
but
ways?
you've also got a lot of people who, there's a lot, how do I say it? There's just more money there. I mean, you look at the real estate values.
Right.
And you look at how those houses are used, there's a lot of vacation rentals. And I think that the vacation rental industry recognizes that having a quality of service is a benefit to them.
Yes.
And not only does it protect the property, but it protects the life and welfare of both native residents and visitors.
Right.
Right, so that, it kind of goes hand in hand. If you want to have a viable vacation industry, you've got to take care of your infrastructure, and that includes the fire service. So they have a pretty good level of service compared to the rest of the
Well,
county.
I also think there's another thing that sometimes the locals in that district take for granted, is that because there are a lot of second homes, and COVID's changed that some, but traditionally there's been a lot of underutilized residences that are paying into the fire districts.
Right.
You're actually that fire district is, in some ways, it's actually been subsidized by people who are not full-time residents.
Right.
And I think that, that dynamic, it had somewhat in Copperopolis. You get
Right.
some of that in
And Copper,
Copperopolis,
right.
but not.
And Copper, so both Ebbets Pass and Copper have passed assessments in recent years
Right.
to have a higher level of service, including medic.
Right.
So the Ebbets Pass passed enough so that they actually have their own ambulance operation. In Copperopolis, they have a medic. They don't transport, but they do have an ambulance and a medic. And they have, so that means that if the only available ambulance is 25 minutes away or something, and
They're still getting medical
then
care.
you're going to get the medical care sooner
Right.
because that medic from the local fire district gets there. That's a great value. That absolutely saves lives. So to the extent, what I would love is I would love to see our districts all funded well enough so that we could start collaborating to have some medics that were just medics in what they call QRVs, quick response vehicles, so that we could have them stationed strategically in the county, because the challenge has been with the ambulance service is to make it pay. The ambulance companies want to have just enough ambulances to meet the requirements, but that means that sometimes the ambulance is a long ways away. With the QRVs, quick response vehicles, the goal would be to staff to have paramedics closer.
Got it.
Now, I don't have the full vision of how to do this exactly, but it's partly a matter of revenue and staffing, is that if you had enough revenue, and you wouldn't have to be one district alone, you could actually have
Got it.
several. So for example, one of the holes where there's often no ambulance and no medic is in the West Point and Mountain Ranch and
Right. Right.
Railroad Flat area.
Right.
That's a natural. Several districts could cooperate. Maybe San Andreas and Moke Hill and Central Calaveras and West Point all cooperate.
And you park a unit
And we-
in Railroad Flats,
Right.
because it's kind of geographically,
Right,
yeah, okay.
something like that, and have it kind of coordinated so that when you know that the ambulances are farther away, that you make sure that there's that available. That kind of thing saves lives. Right now, a lot of the time when you get volunteers, they're at what they call an EMS, EMR, Emergency Medical Responder level of training. And so basically, people like me get that EMR training, and we can put on the plastic gloves, and we can reduce bleeding, and we can do an initial assessment,
Sure.
but we can't do any of the more advanced skills.
Right.
So even
You put your finger in the dike, so
well,
to speak.
even an
to-
EMT is a level above that,
Yeah.
and then above the EMT is the paramedics. The paramedics have life-saving medication. I would love it. Now, I have my father lives in Foothill Village in Angels Camp, and I know that when he's had emergency needs at Angels Camp, fire department responds. I would love it if Angels Camp Fire had a paramedic on
Yes.
duty 24/7.
Yes.
Because that would mean that if the ambulance wasn't available and my dad needed like a heart medication, the paramedic can do that and keep him alive until they can get him in the ambulance and get him to the more intensive care in the hospital.
A positive story on rural health care that I thought was fascinating to me, and I don't want to go too hard as it, but sometimes rural health care can actually be, in a weird way, better, because there's a story about one of the people that used to be one of the owners up in Bear Valley that had a full-blown stroke on the hill, and they called, and when the helicopter came in and everything else is, but at the end of the day, they said that if that would have happened to him where he lived down in the Bay Area, he probably would not have recovered, because it was because the response time, because basically by the time they by the time the air ambulance got there, were able to administer the full, and I forget the name of it now, but it was fascinating. He had a 100% recovery. So he was actually in a thing to where if rural
They got to
medicine
him fast somehow.
faster. So his response time was actually, he thinks because it happened at Bear Valley where there was paramedics on staff, so we had, with the ski patrol and everything else, he had expert medical care literally within minutes, because I think one of the ski patrols saw him go down on a thing. So basically he had his first medical
Intervention
response
promptly.
probably within under a minute. So I think it was interesting. Well, I mean, I'm just saying.
Well,
there's
so it's good to be in a rural area near a paramedic.
Right, that's what the point was. So
Right.
he was, so it was,
Well, near a paramedic who has his supplies or her supplies with him,
right,
right? Because
Right.
like I live with a registered nurse, but she's not got the whole medical cabinet there.
Right.
So that's
Right.
it's a whole program
Right.
to maintain, to have these supplies and everything available.
which they had at Bear Valley at the
Which they
resort.
had at Bear Valley.
So basically, his thing is he would have died if it would have happened at his house, but since it happened on the ski slope,
Yeah,
he survived.
right.
I mean, but anyway,
I hope to make, my hope would be that we'll make the improvements that we're able to make, that
Yeah.
we're, going to upgrade our service, have more firefighters on duty, higher levels of training. In some places, I know from talking to the chief, I don't know if you know, but the same man is the chief for Altaville, Malones, and Angel City.
right,
They have a kind of a cooperative agreement there.
right,
So Altaville, Malones is kind of your classical rural fire district, very little basic revenue. I think it's like the basic tax revenue they get from property tax is like less than $150,000 a year. It's
Got
not
it.
very much. But Angels Camp is right next door, and in fact, the Alta Malone's station is in Angels Camp.
right,
So this is a strange thing where Angels Camp is enough of a city that it really should have 2 fire stations,
Mhm.
but it has 1. And because Angels Camp has not been able to muster the resources to have a second fire station on its own, they contract with Altaville Malones. So for a pittance, they basically pay like $88,000 a year. Altaville Malones uses that for stipends, to have staffing. So basically volunteers staff and are available and take care of the northern half of Angels Camp. Whereas for that amount of money, Angels Camp, if they tried to hire a firefighter, would only get
never
one,
happen.
and that wouldn't even cover shifts 24/7, because one firefighter can only cover maybe a third of the
Right.
time, right? So the city of Angels Camp has been getting a great deal. They do pay living wages to a couple of firefighters at any given time at their main station, but in Alta Malones, they're getting volunteers for like, what, a sixth or an eighth of the cost. Which,
And so Alta Vallones, in essence, goes back to our earlier, I mean, they need strike team money, right?
they need
And
strike
that
team
is-
money,
Yeah.
and so, but is that an ideal thing? No.
No.
But it was what that was possible to do, given the relatively limited resources that Angels Camp was able to muster and the situation. So the result is that Angels Camp gets a better level of service than it really could afford on its
Right.
own, because it has
Right.
this volunteer department that's able to help out. And so really, you always have 2 engines staffed in the Angels Camp area, which is a pretty good start.
Yeah.
If you have, some sort of a major incident. But even, it's a good start, but you remember a couple summers ago, they had that wildland fire that got away in town?
In town,
Right.
yes.
That had like,
Oh,
that
boy.
had, I don't know,
Yes.
there were probably 7 or 8 agencies there by the
Mhm.
time, and that was a huge,
That was
huge
close.
thing.
I mean, they lost, what was it, 2 structures they lost or something like that? Or how many did they, but I mean, it could have been a lot worse.
It could have been a lot worse.
Yeah,
Yeah. A
yeah.
lot worse. So that's a classic example of how we all better hang together, because we'll certainly hang separately.
Yeah.
That if we all tried to go it alone, and I want to give credit, the chief over there, John Rohrbaugh, has also worked on negotiating with CAL FIRE and the dispatch center to improve the way that we coordinate our response, to make sure that resources are allocated in a rational way, and that the closest resources get sent. Because the closest resource isn't necessarily from your home district a lot
Right.
of the time.
Right.
So, in like my district, San Andreas, we respond to things between Moke Hill and San Andreas all the time jointly with Moke Hill. We go down into the Valley Springs area with Calaveras Consolidated. We go up the road to Mountain Ranch. We go out Highway 49 towards Angels Camp, and often vehicle accidents on Highway 49 between here and Angels Camp.
Right.
Both agencies show
Yeah.
up.
Yeah.
Right, so we're always working together. And I want to say that there's always been this sense in recent years, especially when I was a journalist, that, well, why can't Calaveras County all work together? That we were somehow this incohesive, politically difficult place. And that's from watching the Board of Supervisors. There's
Yeah.
often just no consensus. Different parts of the county just have a different vision
Yes.
for what reality is and what we should do, and how to use our resources, all that kind of stuff.
We're down to a couple minutes for this segment.
But I want
So,
to just say
yeah,
that
so that's what I meant, just
the
how to, yeah.
fire agencies have learned to cooperate, and it's
Yes.
not been easy because they've had their differences. But I want to give credit. In the last 10 or 15 years, the chiefs have worked hard to learn how to cooperate and work
Yes.
together well. And so I came into this, and so it was partly that sense that the fire agencies had learned how to work together for the good of all. That's what's going on here, John, and I kind
Yeah.
of wanted to give that story
Oh,
because
yeah, because it is better than it was 5-10 years ago,
it's
right?
much better.
That's what I was, yeah. I mean, and I guess one of the things is one a little pat on the back here, if we can, before the quick, I think at the end of a fire season, you always see the ones, like the one that happened, the fire that was there off of Parrots Ferry Road down in there,
That was a scare.
because if it would have worked up that drainage, I mean, it could have been Caldor fire as well.
It was
'cause
terrifying.
it
Yeah, I was calling up friends who lived in that Pennsylvania Gulch Road area and saying, hey, guys, you better know about this because it had that potential.
And the nice thing is they threw the kitchen sink at that one and got it,
I know.
Yeah, because it would have just,
It would have been a terror.
yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you,
very
John.
much. Thank you.
It's a pleasure.